Good morning, and welcome back to the National Association of Fixed Annuities webcast. I'm Chuck DiVincenzo, President and CEO of NAFA, and we're pleased to bring you back to part two of our series, Getting It Right, the do's and don'ts of AI implementation for life and annuity distribution. In the first webinar we focused on sorting through the noise surrounding artificial intelligence, separating hype from practical application. Today, it's about a year later, actually, we're taking the next step, moving more toward awareness to action. We're to explore how organizations can responsibly and effectively implement AI solutions with life and annuity distribution while maintaining compliance, protecting consumers, and enhancing operational efficiency. As we discussed previously, AI continues to dominate our headlines across industries, but in our space, the conversation must go deeper. It's not just about innovation, it's about implementation, governance, risk management, and measurable value. Once again, we're fortunate enough to have the insights from our premier partner members who have been actively researching and applying AI solutions in real-world environments. Their experience will help us guide through the practical considerations, looking for common pitfalls, and some actionable strategies. I'd like to welcome back Chris Fuhrer, Vice President of Distribution at Premier Partner Unkefer Associates and 2025 Chair of NAFA's Education Committee, who will again guide today's discussion. Chris, thank you and for being with us, and I really appreciate you doing this. I'll let you introduce the panel.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Appreciate you guys. Yep, Chris Fuhrer here. I'm out of sunny Phoenix, Arizona. So it's my pleasure to host our panels today and be a part of a great organization like NAFA. Before we get started, I do want to introduce our panelists today. But I do want to provide a little context for today's program, just to build on what Chuck already said. This is part two, or the follow-up of our first AI panel discussion, which we performed last year at NAFA's Leadership Forum in DC. And we also included this presentation as part of last year's webcast series. We had a great response from our members on this topic, so we wanted to keep the conversation going and wanted to dive a little deeper into the tremendous impact that AI is having within our industry. I'm joined today by three of the industry's leading minds in AI, focusing on the technology, legal, and compliance aspects as we see this technology continue to evolve. First is Andrew Payne. He's the Vice President and General Counsel at CreativeOne in Overland Park, Kansas. And I'm also guessing a Chiefs fan. He currently serves as the chair of the NAFA Board of Directors and has previously served as the chair of the Government and Legal Affairs Committee. We have Patricia Carreiro. She's the chair of Carlton Fields Privacy, Cybersecurity, and AI Practice, and holds multiple privacy and AI certifications, including as an artificial intelligence governance professional and fellow in information privacy. She's a frequent speaker, a prior multi-term chair of the AIPP's South Florida chapter, and spends the majority of her practice advising clients in the life and annuities industry. And we also have Jackie Boehm. Jackie is the Senior Vice President of Project Management and IT Strategy at American Equity. As part of her IT strategy role, Jackie oversees the AI Center of Excellence and chairs the AI Intake Committee. And she's helping decision which AI technology will make the biggest impact on American Equity. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for your expertise and your time today. And we're just going to dig right into it. So first question I got for the panel here is, how is AI being deployed inside our industry, and what kinds of use case inquiries are you getting from interested parties?
I can start us off if you all would like. So the most common use cases that I've been seeing have to do with summarization, note-taking, search and find kind of capabilities, but also helping with personalization and customer service. Really either directing phone calls or actually, chat bots, that kind of thing. Fraud detection is another. Coding, but I'll leave it to you all to also hit on what you have in place.
Yeah, I think that's right. From the ground level is sort of where I'm looking at it from, and the ground level meaning, retail insurance agents or investment advisors. What they're really looking for is like how they're interacting with their client. Like that's the real focus right now. So we're seeing a lot of implementation and questions around note taking and then what to do with those notes afterwards. And sometimes it's word for word type of note taking, and sometimes it's a summary post. And I think that we've been on these webinars talking about compliance and talking about legal risks for years, and been telling folks, it's great to document your conversations and great to follow up with your clients on those notes. And now we've got easy tools that does it for you. So I think people are starting to come around and viewing this as a real compliance helper as opposed to this thing that could potentially run afoul of compliance. And so really that client interaction is where we're seeing a lot of the benefit from. But it bleeds down from there as well. A lot of questions about, hey, how can I use this in marketing? And then I think that a lot of folks are using it in marketing. Generate ideas, maybe even generate the ad itself. I think there's some things we'll talk about later on that could be some problems compliance wise, or even just reputational risk wise. But so we're really starting to see that as how I can deal with my client better, from that perspective, and really just better and faster.
Yeah, it's certainly in efficiency and insight driven, right? Those are the types of use cases that we're seeing, as well as the CSR assist and voice of the customer analytics to help drive next best action or how to do something with the information that you have. So not just the summarization of the notes, but what was the customer sentiment with those, with that phone call, with that note, with that action, is where we're seeing some of the use cases coming in now.
Yeah. And if you guys were on our first webcast, I jokingly mentioned that I was the perfect moderator because I'm like the biggest AI doofus out there. And since that, in the past year, I have had some exposure to the technologies, including a book I read by Jeff Woods called The AI-Driven Leader, which really gave me a lot of great insight. Just as kind of a very basic user to how to approach it, how to implement it. And just in my experience over the last year, kind of starting to use this. I mean, I use this to develop a lot of the questions and the talking points that we're discussing today. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can utilize this just in your day-to-day activity.
Sure. And Chris, if I could just jump in on that, this is the fourth real touch point NAF has had with its membership regarding AI. So I think it first started almost a year ago with this group that just kind of gave a high level of AI. The group got together in Washington, D.C., as you mentioned. And then in October at the Distribution Summit, we had the AI speaker who wrote the book. His name's Woods. What's his name again?
Jeff Woods.
Jeff Woods. And so he provided those books. I think everyone got a blast out of that. And then, so this is our fourth touch point. But I say that to say, at each stage, at each touch point, I think that the technology has changed enough to where there's a big difference. If we would have done this webinar a month ago, I would think they would be different because we've got model updates that happen at the beginning of the month, specifically with ChatGPT and Anthropic, that have completely, it's kind of just skyrocketed what can be done that we're still trying to understand. So when we do the next touch point, I imagine that there's going to be, a whole new set of questions and new set of things that we can do. So I just wanted to point that out as you were talking, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. And by the way, next time, and arguably this time, it could really not even actually be us actually doing it. So, what specific AI techniques and tools help produce high conversion personalized outreach? So examples of like inputs, prompts, outputs, things of that nature.
I would
go
be
first.
careful. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I would just be careful on the personalization and what type of tool you're using. And obviously, we'll get to some of the compliance stuff of it. But I just go back to the Jeff Woods book. I think the inputs is really the key. Is that this is no longer a tool where you should just ask a specific 10-word question. This is a tool where you've got to be very specific with your inputs. And so if you read that book, it talks about that crit analysis, which you're supposed to just put as much context, the interview questions that you wanted to ask back, the role it's going to play, and then what's T? The task. So having a good system is how to get that more personalized, or personalized to you as the agent, I would say, answer. And so I think that the real thing that we should be trying to learn is how to use this tool and really developing that input into the model is really how to get the best outcome. So if I would give anyone one recommendation, it's to start working on that as a skill, about how to use that your inputs into the model to get the best output.
I agree, Andrew. I think it's starting with already approved content, right? Like, what do you have that's already content approved, marketing approved, and then build upon it for your personalization. Now what demographics, now what client profile are you looking at, and build upon what's already content approved to then personalize with your prompts. Don't try and start from scratch, right? Start with something that's already approved and build your prompts upon it to continue to build and personalize the content.
Yeah, and I think the sort of what I think you all are highlighting is the importance of context when you're asking for something, right? And I forget what the study was, but there was a study that was basically like, people typically are providing these very short prompts, and what we really need is something that provides, more meat and guidance. The other piece that I'll add on to this is the sort of understanding of the technology and what it's sort of how it works and what it does, so that you don't ask it to do something that is just like not what it's designed to do, right? Which is part of what I'm sure we'll hit on later, the importance of training. And so that users understand, good tool for X, bad tool for Y.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to all of your points there, if for those that were at our distribution summit and got to listen to Jeff Woods' section, the first thing that he said when he got on stage was, how many people in this room, use ChatGPT like Google, and I raised my hand, and so you're exactly right. Both understanding what its capabilities are, but taking the time to give it the right amount of context. That was the game changer for me. That's when it started to really click for me. So excellent points, guys. Okay. Do you see AI heading down a path to help advisors with product selection, information gathering, and modeling for FIA or fixed cases without violating compliance?
I think it's inevitable. I think that if a company, whoever it is, whether it's a carrier, whether it's an IMO, or whether it's some sort of third party to sell to agents, is now working on that, they would be foolish. I think that there's that what that path looks like, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that there's some sort of AI backed or AI assisted product selection coming from somebody. A carrier is probably going to develop it. That just it's not necessarily an illustration replacement, but it's some sort of assistance with helping the client understand the product better regarding their situation. But you could totally see that coming from third parties as well. I mean, we saw this a lot with the Department of Labor, with lots of software tools and lots of solutions being developed to help product selection, and what annuity would fit and still comply with the Department of Labor rule. Those were coming out, this was 10 years ago. We had a lot of different options. If that was being done right now, those software solutions there would be more of them, they'd be more effective, and they would be quicker to market because, as we'll talk about with coding, has become much easier. It's become much easier to build these types of tools. So I think we'll see it. I don't know what it's going to look like specifically, and I wouldn't necessarily view it as something that conflicts with compliance if it's built in the right way. Certainly there's a way to, it needs to be verified. You don't necessarily want a carrier putting a thumb on a scale with their tool to be like, oh, this product is obviously the best one and our model shows it. But so there's got to be some sort of independent verification of that. But that's the way we could say, like, it's probably not going to be useful. But I think there's in the industry, AI is going to play a role in kind of that competitiveness, and so it's going to happen here. But I view it more as compliance helping rather than conflicting with.
I think we can see it for sure coming in from a suitability and information gathering, right? I mean, AI can analyze risk tolerance, it can look at financial goals, it can help gather the information. But the key is that it should be decision support, not financial advice. So it still has to come with human oversight, transparent logic, and controls to prevent the bias that you were just talking about, Andrew, right? There has to be a governance framework to ensure the recommendations remain compliant and ultimately explainable. How did it come up with this answer, right? So we need to understand the guardrails and the inputs and outputs to be able to explain the answer that was given.
Yeah, we have a client now. I think this client probably worked for them about a year ago or so, but they had a tool that was basically helping the agent to understand certain things, but it was more of like an information find. And then it can like provide a link and a source to that so the person could actually go and verify. But it was helpful for getting them information faster, that sort of search and find piece of it. So given that that's already live and functioning, I'm with you, Andrew, that, unavoidable. I do think part of the challenge comes in the key to human in the loop and making sure we're not asking AI to basically do something that you would require a license of a person to do and just letting it run from there, which hits on all those sort of governance points that Jackie was just referring to.
Yeah, two thoughts come to mind. The first is, look, we've got a lot of newer carriers that are in this space that had the luxury of building out their technology and infrastructure systems based on today's technology and not, AS400 systems from, 100 years ago. And so we are seeing those folks use some basic level AI for initial underwriting and suitability review and that kind of thing. Now, to your point, we are still seeing that get to humans at some point in time, but there's just, fixed parameters that they can, kind of earmark and go from there. So we're already seeing it in some regard there. And the other part of it too is like we got kind of a taste of what this would look like from a regulatory standpoint, 15 years ago when 151A reared its ugly head, and we saw all those best interest practices or standards that were being set forth for us, and the accredited institutions and all the big IMOs out there started freaking out and trying to build out all this governance stuff. Of course, it wasn't really using AI back then, but it's kind of the same concept. It's like, well, let's put in all these guardrails and then let the humans use it, as a kind of as a framework to work with it. So now that technology is just a little smarter and it's probably more feasible and more beneficial for everybody. So great points, guys. Is it possible for smaller independent operations to institute appropriate governance and guardrails as they use AI within their practice without having a dedicated, robust budget like those larger carriers and larger IMOs?
For sure. I think one piece of this is to remember the role that technology can play in allowing you to do more work than you otherwise could, right? That technology obviously has a cost that you have to factor in, but you can use technology to oversee technology as well, right? And that is increasingly common and I think a definite force multiplier. Now, it shouldn't be just technology overseeing technology, right? That's my little asterisk.
Yeah, that's
And
when
I
you get into
think
Skynet territory.
yeah, that does overhang everything here a little bit. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, this technology is very democratic in the sense of, you know, we're all working from the same tool. Like, theoretically, like it's all kind of off the shelf, and so you know, there's some proprietary stuff that can be built, but ultimately, someone who's, you know, smaller in the business can utilize the tool just as much as someone in the who's, you know, multi-billion-dollar company. And so it just depends on how you use it. You can use it in a much smarter way. You can use, I mean, it's really about how effective you can be in putting it to work. And so some of that creativity, you know, comes along with it. But I think it ultimately allows a smaller fish to compete more because they've got such a robust tool to assist them.
Yeah, I think we put up our own roadblocks and think that it requires custom models and large investments and things of that sort. But it doesn't. You can use enterprise platforms with built-in compliance, and sometimes the smaller companies can move faster with that type of model and be really intentional in what type of AI they implement and how they use it. And so they can adopt it responsibly without a heavy infrastructure spend.
I do think the due diligence gets extra important there and thinking through the governance, though, because I start hearing those things and I'll admit that my blood pressure starts going up a little bit because I'm like, oh, there's just so many ways to also go wrong with it.
Agreed.
Oh, well, you know, and I know I keep going back to this, but you know, Jeff Woods' book, I mean, he talks about how he's built his own board of directors, you know, and he's got people on his board that are no one you'd never have a shot at having a conversation with, let alone getting some business advice. And, you know, so for the small, you know, independent operations out there, you know, you utilize the technology properly, you can get business advice from Warren Buffett.
So long as you're okay, right? So long as you're okay with it being a probabilistic, like, here's what he might say.
Yes,
right?
correct.
Like,
yeah, absolutely. There's a big asterisk next to that one. Correct. Yeah. So on that thought, though, what pre-adoption steps should a small agency take? You know, examples: digital or data mapping, pilot scope, success metrics, that kind of thing.
I'll just start off, and I'll let Trish and Jackie kind of go into the more details because that's sort of their day-to-day. But from what I would suggest and what I'm talking to advisors, understand what data you do have, understand what your current tech stack is. You know, hopefully you're using a CRM, but is that CRM, you know, are you putting a lot of information into it? Are you, how are you documenting, you know, interactions with clients? So really, I mean, it's easy to say that, understanding what you do have, but sometimes people don't necessarily take that inventory in the way that they should. So I would just make sure that we have a good understanding of where we currently sit before we start to branch out into some of these newer tools, and whether it's as simple as a ChatGPT subscription or, you know, some of these software that are, you know, we're getting emails about stuff all the time, what's good and what's bad, what can integrate. But having a good inventory, you should have that anyway, but if you want to take off, that's where you should start.
I would take it a step back. Actually, one step backwards would be education and risk awareness first. Before you even start looking at your data and looking at cleaning and organizing your information, you need to be aware of what you're hoping to do, how you want to do it, and risk awareness around what that opens you up to. And then start looking at your data and looking at how you're organizing it and how you're going to start exposing it. Yeah, I think education and risk awareness comes first, and then data and organizing.
Yeah, if I could layer on that, I know we talked about data, and when we're talking about that, just to add a little bit more descriptions, basically like, how do you keep your data? Is it collected in one place? Basically, do you know where to tell the AI to go look and gather and direct it toward, right? The other piece of it, I think, is this question of pain points and identifying really what are we struggling with. It just seems inefficient, and is AI a good match for that? And then I think the governance structure itself, right? It is a significantly better place to be to build your governance structure before you start implementing use cases, right? What you don't want to be doing is building the plane while in it, because there's just so many more risks and so much more stress for everyone involved when that is the approach.
Yeah, and I think to layer slightly on that is making sure that any pilots that you do have clear success measures, right? Like, how are you going to measure at the end productivity, growth, or service was enhanced through the tool? And so making sure that you have defined metrics going into the pilot will also help you understand the success of it.
Yeah, and if I could even layer on top of that too, I think when we're thinking about this too, like, remember the paper trail that you are forming now about all that you are doing and considering and how you can then use that because things will go wrong, right?
Yep.
And so you need to show how diligent you were in looking under all these rocks, doing the testing, and that you thought through these issues and had a plan for the sort of inevitable, hey, something went wrong.
Thank you. What is the difference between public models and private hosted solutions, and when is it acceptable to use each?
Trish,
I'll
you
let
want
you
to
guys
start?
go. The way I understand it, I mean, so there's different ways you can think about it. There's pure off-the-shelf large language model like a Claude or a Chat GPT. You may pay for it, you may even not pay for it. So that's your traditional off-the-shelf. That is, hosted out there somewhere else. The information that you put in to that gets sucked up into the model, uses it to learn. And so that's not what you want when you're dealing with client information. I think that there's other options where you're maybe still doing a off-the-shelf product, but it's more internally. It's not using that information to train the model, and I think there's going to be a cost with that. And then there's internally hosted servers. There's benefits to that as well. Maybe overkill for a lot of the things, but for maybe larger companies, I know larger companies are, before you put anything into a LLM, it has got to be internally housed servers. So those are I don't know if we necessarily at the agent level need to focus on where those things are coming from, but maybe mostly what are you doing with that data? Make sure that data is not going out into the ether to be learned by someone else. But I'll let the professionals talk about it a little bit more.
I mean, I think that's a fair level to keep it at. I don't know that we, but point being the consciousness about what's happening with the data that you put in, and whether you're just sending it out the door, or whether there's actually some sort of control and what kind of visibility you have into what's happening to that data once you enter it in, right? That's got a mix of pieces to it. Part of it is just contractual. What are you giving away rights to or not? Other pieces of it, and I'm sorry to keep coming back, but like how tech can play a role in this, right? Is there are technologies that, to expand upon this question a bit, technologies that you can sort of layer into what you're doing to help protect privacy better. So for example, instead of, the information just going out and, harnessing the power of ChatGPT, there's a layer built on top of it that strips out the personal information, right? Who replaces the person's name or identifiers with like XY, and then when the output from ChatGPT then comes back to that layer before it gets to you, feeds back in the personal information, right? And so you have different sort of technology components there. And so you can ask these questions of the sort of vendors you work with as well, as far as like, hang on, before that data gets to the underlying, AI model doing a lot of the work here, what protections do we have in place there as well?
Yeah, the public models are ideal for general productivity use cases, right? So your research, your content drafting, your coding, your prototyping, things that aren't customer PII information. When you're getting into very sensitive data, that's when you need to make sure that it's a private or hosted solution that isn't going to leave your firewall, that isn't going to get out into the greater world. But that's where the personalization of the content comes in. So you're not going to get the generalization of productivity gains, but you're going to get the specific response for the client that you're working with. And so it's what do you want to do with the information would drive what technology you use.
If I may go off script for 1 second here, just in follow up to that point, Jackie, is the user experience pretty different between the public models and a private model? Like, you put the same prompts in, are you getting different results back, at least like in on generic level?
I mean, it depends on how well you've trained your private model, right? You have to keep up with training your own private model because it isn't getting all of the information of the World Wide Web. It's only getting your information. So, that's why the productivity gains are really found in the public hosted arena.
And there's a lot that gets built on top too, right? So I think one thing that that we're not really talking about too is then what happens when, like, as is expected, the price of all these underlying models starts to get jacked up too, and then everything that's built upon it sort of has to come to task with, okay, what do we have to do with our pricing structure now? But granted, that's a little bit of an aside, but gorilla in the room.
What are important considerations in reference to error handling, remediation, and litigation readiness?
Chris, this is you.
I'm pretty sure that could be its own hour. But just to give some little bit of a sort of more late breaking, there have been some recent decisions from the court basically about your AI record keeping and keeping track. And basically, if you know about litigation, remember to go to your AI models and also save what's being entered there. Because if you don't, it's going to be potentially viewed as spoliation, right? But oftentimes when you're thinking about your document preservation for litigation, you don't really think about, oh, that AI tool that we have in place, right? So I will say, to just hit a little bit on the litigation side of it there, careful.
Yep. Logging all prompts and outputs for full audit trail, right? Like you certainly have to have that.
Could I just ask a question? Like, is that going to be, I mean, maybe it already has been, and luckily you haven't been involved in a lot of discovery lately, but is that going to be something that's put into a general, all emails, all AI prompts that you've inputted regarding this issue?
Oh, you can absolutely see that coming up in discovery, right? And part of the risk also comes in like, well, what if it's something my attorney told me and then I'm saving it somewhere, right? And then we're having to deal with work product versus attorney-client privilege, and what can we do with that? And have we just waived some rights that we didn't realize we were waiving when we decided to use AI, right? There's been some recent litigation results on that point as well. So I think it sort of adds up to being aware of the rights you may be giving up when you use AI. And that ties back to what we were saying earlier as well about, do I own those outputs? Like, is it training on my data? That has consequences to your litigation privilege as well, right? Because then it's like, well, that wasn't just provided for legal advice, right? It was also training some other model. And so, like, can you really claim that that was confidential, especially if you put it into an open model, right? Then it's sort of like, well, did you just intentionally ship that information out the door for everyone to learn about it? That was a Debbie Downer sequence, sorry.
Debbie ups and downs with this.
Well, that's get into litigation, right? Is always kind of a
But you have to go there.
That's right. So what guardrails should be considered when using AI to generate marketing and ad copy for annuity products?
Well, I'll start, just from the IMO perspective, and obviously we're working very closely with our ad and compliance people at all the carriers, and us at CreativeOne also have a RIA and broker dealer, so a lot of compliance and ad review comes through those filters as well. I think you still got to maintain all of your current guidelines and make sure that they're heavily complied with. Just because it's easier to create something doesn't mean that any kind of rule that you've developed, either from the carrier level or from the SEC level on the security side, that goes away. And so I in terms of guardrails, if you're building something directly from a model, which we've seen happen a little bit, I think that's going to be more and more, like, there is a way to layer on some compliance, especially regarding text, some compliance rules within the development. So I think there's a couple pieces of software that have come out that really it'll show you a red flag of, oh, you can't show a pot of gold on your mailer, or you can't, or you use the word guarantee in here, this guarantee word's not going to fly. And so those will become more and more sophisticated. So I'll just say that, like, you can, just as you can build out compliance development, you can, or marketing development, you could build inside the compliance to it. The other thing I'll say is that I think people do have to be careful a little bit. Like, this is maybe outside of IMO world or insurance world, and the use of AI, and are you getting across what you want to the client? And what we're really selling here in this business is trust. And I don't think that what we're seeing really from a lot of people is, if you put some sort of obviously AI generated content or obviously AI generated image, are you conveying trust to that client? I think that there's a specific look that a OpenAI image conveys. You can tell. And so when I'm marketed as just an individual, not as anyone connected to this industry, but when I'm marketed something that's an AI image that I can tell is an AI image, it turns me off immediately. And I don't know if I can explain why. Maybe it's like they didn't put the work into it, or they just type something in and it spits it out, and they're trying to target me this way. So I think we do have to be careful of overusing it or using it in a bad way, to where we're turning off and we're kind of turning down that trust meter instead of up. So not only we keep a track of just the bare bones compliance, but also, this is kind of getting into a territory of, are we turning clients off by getting into that territory?
100% agree with that. It's sort of like the human aspect becomes like a premium on top of the AI, right? Because it's like they cared enough that I'm speaking to a person and not just some AI, right? And that sort of relational component, that matters. And so I think that's definitely a piece of it. Probably even maybe less for, the super young people. They seem more okay with trusting technology more than, say, I might be, or others, right? But I think that's certainly a piece of it when it comes to just trust. So absolutely. I think another couple pieces to think about when we're looking at the marketing piece of it is, one, remember those sort of labeling. If you're putting something out across like social media channels, there is typically a requirement that it be identified. So maybe it's, the hashtag AI generated, or that kind of, like, the labels that many of the channels have, that, you have to remember, like, yes, there's a requirement there. I think the other piece of it is just to look at the IP side of it too, right? What's getting ripped off to create maybe the image that has been given to you? Is that going to be problematic? And then if you want to copyright something that you've created, then you have to be really careful to sort of keep tabs on what sort of human input was put into that. Because if it was just straight, hey, the AI generated it, then you're not going to be able to assert rights over it, right? So if you're using that and you want to point out the human role in what's created, then you're going to have that for the argument that you should be able to then have rights over what both the human and the AI came together to create.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of saying the same thing, that, the compliance standards are the same, whether it's AI generated or human generated. We have to stick to the same compliance standards as a base. But then once you start publishing, to Tricia's point, there's going to be some copyright additions to anything that's AI generated and additional things to consider. And we haven't mentioned the word hallucination, but I think this is where that also comes into play, where if we're creating content that has the potential risk of hallucination, how are we safeguarding ourselves against that? And that's where, again, the human review has to take place. And we have to be reviewing the content, the words. Andrew, you mentioned, did we say guaranteed? The words that are generated, the words that are put in print, they might be plausible, but are they real? And so, making sure that we are putting the human controls over anything that's AI generated.
Yeah. And to hit on a risk area too, making sure that it's not the, cognitive surrender, human in the loop review, right? Which I think, Jackie, goes back to your point about training the risks. And I know it looks good, but that doesn't mean that you can just trust it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a relevant point expressed by Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, which is just because he could doesn't mean he should. So very relevant here. The other thing, Trish, that you mentioned too that I think is really interesting is, I'm very involved in music, and specific to your point, we're seeing a lot of copyright conversations regarding AI generated music. It's really interesting to see how the industry is responding to that, and how artists are responding to that. It's really an interesting conversation that's happening right now. So, all right. So when we're kind of at the end of our questions here, I just want to throw one more thing out there before we wrap up. And look, we're hoping that we provide some valuable information to our members that are joining us on today's cast. And for these folks, if they're anything like me, it's a really overwhelming idea to implement this into your practice, your business that you sweat and tears over, if it's something that you're not very familiar and confident with. So, from the kind of new user perspective, can you guys, can the panelists provide one final practical tip that producers, folks can implement this week if they wanted to move towards this technology?
Sure, I'll start. I would suggest, I think we talked about it a little bit before, but really work on your prompts. I think start there. I mean, maybe not even use it for your business, but just use it to generally familiarize yourself with the tool and working on your prompts. And there's a lot of interesting models out there, or models, I shouldn't use that word, but interesting theories in terms of how to talk to it and how to put those prompts. But the more information you put in, and I think a great place is the Jeff Woods book, the AI-driven leader. That's just one option. Use the model to help you come up with other prompts. I think that's where you're really going to show the difference and the competitive advantage if you can really master that.
I would say actually two things. Be curious and be intentional. So view AI to fuel growth, productivity, and your client experience. The firms that win won't be the ones with the most AI. They'll be the ones using it the most intentionally. And so educate yourself. What's the best use case for your business? What's to Trisha's point earlier, what are your current roadblocks, barriers, workflow problems? Be intentional with what you're exploring, because having the most isn't the best answer. But being curious and intentional with what you bring into your business, into your infrastructure, will help you leaps and bounds.
Yeah, I think if I could suggest something really basic, it's just we're going to use a spreadsheet because, spreadsheets make everything better. Okay, so a spreadsheet of like potential use cases. And this you then start building out with use cases, like maybe other tools that you've heard of, and experiences that others maybe in the industry or that you've spoken to that have insights on that have used. What were their reactions to it? You can sort of take multiple tools and then you can end up comparing them against each other to see, pros and cons of each, right? But I think it starts with having a structured way of thinking through, okay, what do I want to do, right? You can sort of point out what data you have, right? So I think just building a spreadsheet where you dump all the information that you need to think about first, right? Mm-hmm. The pain points, the how do we address them, the sort of risks associated with it. And then you start listing out maybe the right people who would test that solution within your organization, right? So you start to get the buy-in from people and thinking through those steps. And then when they do their tests, you then add on to that spreadsheet, right? And you can keep track of, okay, what were the impressions? Is it a not yet tool, but it's getting better and better, so maybe? Or is it something where we're like, it's just not the right tool for us, maybe because it's cost prohibitive, maybe for other reasons, right? But I find it helpful to have a frame to think through and document all the thoughts. So as basic as a spreadsheet to just start dumping it in and getting input from others in your organization about potential use cases. Because lots of times you hear people get very excited, maybe because they've spoken to someone selling some of these tools, but not everything we hear from the people selling the tools is always as reliable and 100% disclosure sort of accurate as we might like.
Not as advertised.
Or at least not guaranteed to be, because those disclaimers and limitations of liability tend to be pretty hefty.
Mm-hmm.
Great advice. Thanks, guys. All right, so we're just about out of time here, but real quick, thanks again to our expert panelists. Appreciate your ideas and great advice and insight. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. I hope you got something good out of it. And I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck to close us up.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. By the way, I messed up at the beginning and didn't have your new organization, Southwest Annuities Marketing, so I appreciate you not calling me out on that. But I really appreciate Jackie, Patricia, and Andrew, and Chris for moderating. Chris is more like me. One of the things I did learn from that, the book on AI was we're right at the beginning of this threshold, and to ask both obvious and non-obvious questions was one of the key things I always thought about. So I really appreciate all of you, and I think we will continue this dialogue, I'm sure, for some time, as I think we're just at the beginning like we talked about. So I want to thank our NAFA members. I really appreciate that, and for the time they're sharing today. Your engagement and commitment to professional excellence are what we do to strengthen our association and our industry. If you're not a NAFA member and would like to access the webcast recording, future educational program, and these valuable resources, which we're so lucky to have, please come to NAFA.com, click membership, and then join NAFA to support enables us to continue advancing our mission on behalf of the fixed annuity industry. Thank you all again. In closing, I want to express my gratitude to our premier partners, Jackie, Tricia, Andrew, and Chris, for their expertise, and we look forward to many dialogues about this in the future. Thank you all for your time and attendance.